Okay, so you want to own a private prison. The government is your customer. The government pays you by the day. And the government has spent 40 years building the largest incarcerated population on Earth to send your way. Sounds simple. Here's what you'd assume. More crime, more prisoners, more money. Every sane person thinks that's how this business works. Every one of them is wrong. There's a single clause buried in almost every one of these contracts that changes everything you think you know about this business. It doesn't reward crime. It doesn't even need crime. I'm going to show it to you, but not yet. First, you need to see this business the normal way, because once you see the clause, you won't be able to unsee it. This is zero sum. Let's open the ledger. Private prisons aren't one business. They're three, and you only need to know the shape of each one. State contracts, where a company houses people convicted of state crimes and gets paid a daily rate per head. Federal immigration detention, where ICE pays a private operator directly to hold detainees. Right now, this is the fastest growing piece of the entire industry. And county contracts, where a private company runs a local jail, stacking local, state, and federal detainees under one roof to keep the beds full. Two companies run almost this entire market: GEO Group and CoreCivic. In 2024, GEO Group brought in roughly $2.4 billion, CoreCivic close to $2 billion. In 2025, both companies posted the best year in their history, and CoreCivic's revenue from ICE alone roughly doubled in a single year. That's not a company growing with the economy. That's a company whose fortune moves with a single federal policy lever. Here's the scale of that shift. Through 2025, GEO Group expanded its immigration detention capacity to roughly 26,000 beds. That's not organic growth from a healthier economy or a bigger customer base finding them on their own. That's one federal agency deciding to detain more people, and two companies expanding to match it almost overnight. Remember that. It matters later. Now, the cost of getting in. A small county facility, tens of millions of dollars. A large detention center, 1,000 beds or more, several hundred million. You need the fencing, the surveillance, the medical wing, staff around the clock every day, forever. There's no slow season in this business, no off-peak discount on guards. And here's the strange part. Sometimes the building goes up before the contract does. Operators have built detention capacity speculatively, betting on a future policy shift, and carried that cost for months, sometimes years, waiting for the government to show up and fill it. That's an enormous amount of money sitting idle on a bet. So the industry did something about that. They went to the negotiating table, and they asked for a guarantee. Here it is, the clause. It's called an occupancy guarantee. And once a state signs it, something strange happens to the entire logic of crime and punishment inside that facility. Let me show you exactly how strange. A 2013 investigation reviewed more than 60 private prison contracts across the country. Roughly 2 out of every 3 contained this clause. The most common threshold was 90% occupancy. Some, in Arizona, required 100. Here's what that means in plain English. The state has agreed to keep the prison at least 90% full, or pay the company anyway as if it were full. Sit with that for a second. Now, here's Colorado. Over a decade, crime in Colorado fell by roughly a third. Fewer arrests, fewer convictions, fewer people who needed a bed. The prison started emptying out. By any normal measure, that's a win. Fewer people incarcerated is the entire point of criminal justice reform. Colorado should have been saving money. Then the bill arrived. An occupancy clause covering 3 private facilities still forced Colorado's taxpayers to pay several million dollars for beds that were empty because crime went down. Read that back. The state was financially punished for successfully reducing its own crime rate. Researchers have a name for this. They call it the low crime tax. And once you understand that clause, you understand the entire business. This company was never betting on more crime. It was betting on a signature. The signature was the product,
not the prisoner. Okay, let's keep going, because the guarantee is just the first mechanism. There are 3 more, and they get worse. Inside the fence, there's exactly one store, the Commissary. No competitors, no walking away, no comparison shopping. An investigation that pulled pricing data from prison systems in dozens of states found markups running as high as 600%, prices up to 5 times what the same item costs outside the wall. Florida signed a $175 million commissary contract that handed the state a commission above 35% on every marked up item sold. In Nevada, a state audit of one commissary vendor found products marked up by as much as 40% above cost, on top of whatever cut the state itself was already taking. Now here's the part that actually lands. The average incarcerated worker earns a few cents an hour for a full day of labor. Some jobs pay less than $1 a day. Imagine working an entire shift and spending nearly half of what you earned on a single bag of chips. That's not inflation. That's the business model. Now the phone call. And this one has a twist that's still unfolding. For decades, calling home from prison in America was absurdly expensive. Over $11 in some jails for 15 minutes. In 2024, the FCC finally capped it, 6 cents a minute. That $11 call dropped to under $1. Families celebrated. It felt like the fight was over. It wasn't. In October of 2025, after pressure from telecom providers and sheriffs who said the caps would gut facility revenue, the FCC voted to roll the rates back up, roughly doubling them. Not back to $11, but back up, in the wrong direction. So ask yourself, if the price of a phone call can be cut in 1 year and pushed back up the next, who actually controls that number? It isn't the person making the call. One more mechanism, and this is the one that leaves the building. Federal law requires most able-bodied federal inmates to work. Many end up in a program called UNICOR, paying wages of roughly 23 cents to $1.15 an hour. UNICOR sells several $100 million a year in prisoner-made goods, mostly back to the federal government, which is legally required to buy from UNICOR first. But it doesn't stop there. A 2024 Associated Press investigation traced connections between prison labor supply chains and products sold by major American retailers and restaurant chains, from big-box store shelves to fast food supply lines. Somewhere, a company gets a product made for a fraction of what a minimum wage worker would cost. That gap doesn't disappear. It becomes someone's margin. You may have already paid for it. You just didn't know whose hands made it. And unless you go looking, you never will. The label doesn't say who made it. It just says where it was sold. 4 mechanisms. 1 business. An occupancy guarantee that gets paid whether crime rises or vanishes. A store with no competitors. A phone rate that moves based on political leverage, not cost. A labor pool paid a fraction of market wages. None of these require more crime. They only require the contract to already exist. But here's the risk, because this isn't bulletproof. In 2016, the DOJ announced it would phase out private federal prisons. Both companies' stocks dropped hard in a single day. In 2021, Biden ended DOJ contracts with private operators entirely, though ICE contracts kept growing underneath that order. By 2025, under a new administration prioritizing immigration enforcement, both companies reversed again, sharply, upward. So the occupancy guarantee protects the company from a swing in local crime. It does not protect the company from a swing in national politics. That's the one variable nobody can put in a contract. And yet, notice the pattern. Every time the political winds shift against this industry, the response isn't to exit the business, it's to wait. CoreCivic kept its facility standing through the 2021 order. GEO Group kept building capacity through years when federal appetite for private detention was shrinking. Because the operators understand something simple about this country's incarceration rate. It doesn't stay low forever, and it doesn't stay the same policy forever either. The occupancy guarantee buys years. Patience buys the rest. Here's one more twist, and this one might include you. Both GEO Group and CoreCivic are publicly traded, which means anyone can buy a share. But most shareholders never bought one on purpose. Vanguard and BlackRock, the two largest asset managers on Earth, each hold significant stakes in both companies, largely through broad index funds, the kind of fund sitting inside millions of ordinary retirement accounts. Over the past several years, some of the largest public pension funds in the country tried to walk away. New York City divested. CalPERS, the biggest public pension fund in America, divested. Teachers' retirement funds in California and New Mexico divested. Each time, the headline was the same. A major institution says it will no longer profit from this industry. But an index fund doesn't work that way. If a stock sits inside the benchmark, it sits inside your fund too, whether you noticed or not. So it's entirely possible the same person outraged by an occupancy guarantee is holding a sliver of the company enforcing it, sitting quietly inside a retirement account they haven't checked since it was opened. That's not a hypothetical. That's just how index investing works. So here's the full ledger. On one side, two public companies, record revenue, record profit, rising stock. On the other, a state paying millions for beds nobody needed. A family paying to hear a voice on the phone. A person earning cents an hour, spending half of it on a bag of chips that costs 6 times what you'd pay for it outside the wall. Every dollar of profit in this business has an address. It came from a taxpayer, or a family, or someone with no other option and no leverage to say no. That's not a side effect. That's the business. A casino needs you to walk back onto the floor. A rancher needs the weather to cooperate. A gas station needs you to pull off the highway thirsty. A private prison needs none of that. It never had to earn a customer. It never had to compete on price or service or anything at all. Before the first prisoner ever arrived, before the first guard clocked in, before the first crime was even committed, the money was already guaranteed. It just needed one signature.